Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Anderson, and I am Mosaic Miami's Executive Director. We are so lucky to have this partnership with Barry in this environment of divisiveness and hate in our country. It's an interesting time where, the professor said it best, common ground needs to exist. And the arts are a jumping off point to have and find common ground. Gable Stage, starting with Joe Adler and now with Barry, give us something to talk about on the way home and make the arts relevant with what's going on today. And that's what I hope our conversation is going to do for us, to enable us to find some common ground. And I'm lucky enough to be able to do the talkbacks for every Gable Stage play. And when I was studying old wicked songs, I immediately thought of Jerry. I was lucky enough to meet Jerry and his wife Jody when they first moved to Miami, for him to become a distinguished professor at the University of Miami and to lead the Palm Beach Symphony. And the parallels that Jerry's life has with Stephen's, you really can't make up. And I'm grateful to Jerry for saying yes to go on this journey with me. My dear friend Claudia DeMonte, who is here today, is an extraordinary connector. And the folks that sit around her dinner table are so extraordinary. And I was so fortunate to get to know Jerry around that dinner table. A little bit of background about Jerry. If I read his full bio, we would be here probably till next year. So I'll give you a little bit of background. Jerry is internationally recognized for his moving performances, innovative programming, and extensive catalog of recording. American conductor Gerard Schwartz serves as music director of the All-Star Orchestra, Eastern Music Festival, Palm Beach Symphony, and Mozart Orchestra of New York, and is conductor laureate of the Seattle Symphony and conductor emeritus of the Mozart Festival. He holds the position of distinguished professor of music, conducting and orchestral studies at the Frost School of Music at the University of Miami, and music director of the Frost Symphony Orchestra. Schwartz is a renowned interpreter of 19th century German, Austrian, and Russian repertoire, in addition to his noted work with contemporary American artists. So let's put our hands together for Gerard Schwartz. So, with yesterday being Holocaust Remembrance Day, I think a good place for us to start is your family story. We heard the professor say that in 1940, his family was asked to pack their bags, which is plus or minus a year of that happening to your family. And Stephen said, to be Viennese and Jewish, how much more can one suffer? In the theme of sadness and joy, I think that's really your family's story. As when sadness began in your family, your grandparents made some really important decisions that allow us to be here on the stage together. So can we start with that story?
Thanks, man. Thank you all. Thank you all. You can hear me without the microphone?
No.
Yes? Fine. I'm a little embarrassed to be on the stage after seeing these two great actors. They are remarkable, and their play is extraordinary. For me, it was one of the more remarkable theatrical experiences I've had. It's just incredible. It's also my story. And all of us in this room have stories to tell. Not one of us that doesn't have a story. If you happen to be Jewish and first generation, as I am, we have similar stories to tell. I remember my dear friend Misha Dichter, the great American pianist, was born in Shanghai. I know friends who were born in Australia, people who emigrated to many different countries. I have an uncle in 1938 who was lucky enough to go to Palestine, obviously became Israel. My parents and my grandparents' story is probably not so dissimilar from some of you here. My parents were, my mother was from Vienna, My father was from Mödling. Mödling is a suburb of Vienna, most notable for the city, little town where Beethoven wrote the Missa Solemnis. In Austria, in Vienna, and in Weiners, they always take the great moments of musical history as their own. The adage that the Austrians say the Austrians are proud to say that Beethoven was an Austrian, which in fact he was born in Germany, and Hitler was a German, but in fact he was born in Austria. It's a story of a great cultural capital. Many of you have been in Vienna, and you know that music is part of the city. You can't talk to anyone, whether it be a cab driver or the concierge in any hotel or any waiter, and not be able to talk about Mozart, and talk about Beethoven, and Schubert, and Brahms. They all loved and cared deeply about this city of music. But it was also, as the author said, among the most prejudiced cities in the world, probably to this day. I remember going down the main street of Mödling with my father, probably 40 years ago, when, Mödling now, if you went to visit Vienna, it's a nice stop. It's like 15 minutes on the tram, and it has, all the Gucci and the Versace and all the high-end stores, and it's charming. I remember going there and asking them where the Jewish cemetery was, and no one knew that there was even a Jewish cemetery, which there was, and I found. And the Stars of David in the fence surrounding the cemetery were all knocked out, because that's what they did. And my father walked down that main street with me, and he pointed to every house, and he told me what their names were, houses, there's shops in those days, and houses, but who lived there, what their names were, and whether they were Nazis or not. And most of them were Nazis. It's a frightening story that we all know and we will never forget. Holocaust Remembrance Day is there for that reason. My parents' story and grandparents is typical. My parents were in medical school, both of them doctors, in 1938. In 1938, a sign went up on the hallway, all the hallways at the University of Vienna Medical School, which was probably the most prominent medical school in Europe. It said, no Jews allowed anymore. Everyone had to leave the next day. And which meant 50% of the faculty left. 50% of the faculty at medical school and university were Jewish, and they were replaced by party members, and the school obviously was not what it became, not what it was. My parents, both obviously German speakers, had to try to figure out a way to finish their last year of medical school. And they couldn't leave in 38. They couldn't get a visa to come to the United States, is where they were thinking that they would like to go. As you know, people went to different places. But I'll give a little story of my grandparents. My grandparents on my mother's side stayed, and when my parents came to the United States in 39, they tried very hard to get them to come, couldn't arrange it, and they were murdered in Latvia. In 1943, they were on the last transport out of Vienna, shot into an open grave. And that was my maternal grandparents, Rudolf and Jeanette. How do I know? Because the Nazis kept impeccable, as we all know, records of everyone they killed. It's shocking to see their names, which I have. But in the same fashion, I saw my parents' grades in medical school. They were fabulous students, I may. But on my father's side, his mother was from a city called Bokanska Slatina in Croatia now, but it then was in Yugoslavia. And my father spoke many languages, he spoke French, he spoke German, he spoke English, he spoke Croatian. And because of his mother, he was able to go to Zagreb and apply for a visa to come to the United States for him and my mother, Gerard. So they then had the chore of trying to find out how to get finish medical school in Switzerland, obviously. And the medical school that they were able to get into was Basel. So they did their last year of medical school in Basel. Now, we all know about the Swiss. You know, I'm very grateful to them because my parents were able to finish school there. But you all probably know that you can't go to Switzerland unless you can prove that you will not be awarded the state. You have to have money to go to Switzerland. My grandfather on my father's side, who died of natural causes in the early 30s, put money, because he was a doctor as well, put money in the bank in Switzerland so my parents could go to Switzerland and spend their year there. At the end of that year, they got back to Zagreb. All these stories, I said they got back to Zagreb. There's no easy story there, but they got back to Zagreb. They had a visa, and they came to the United States, not through Ellis Island, because they came back on a tourist visa. Shocking, isn't it? And then, so now they arrived, so they came on the Ile-de-France, arrives in Hoboken, that's where the port was, in New Jersey. And my father's name was Hans Schwartz, 1939. So, and he was a doctor. Think about getting a job as a doctor with the name of Hans Schwartz in 1939. So first thing he did was change his name to John. We Jews all changed our names, or converted in those days, and earlier. Gustav Mahler was mentioned. Gustav Mahler was Jewish. He had to convert because you were not allowed to be the director of the Inner Opera unless you were a non-Jew, so he converted. He married Alma Mahler, who was anti-Semitic, and her mother was especially anti-Semitic. Bizarrely, Alma married 3 times, twice to Jews, once to Franz Werfel and once to Gustav Mahler. Franz Werfel was a very famous poet, playwright. They came to New York in 1934, I think, 35. An interesting story, as you can imagine. But so now, I mean, the story gets quite long, but I will give a very couple sentences that I find interesting about it. So my father did his internship and residency in St. Mary's Hospital in New Jersey, in Hoboken. And interestingly, he became the president of that hospital later in life. He was a great surgeon. There was a doctor in a town called Weehawken that took him in as a partner. And these are, of course, how incredible for, I don't remember his first name, Dr. Tyndall was his name, to take my father in as a partner. And I remember my parents fighting about this. And you said, well, why would that be? It's because when Dr. Tyndall took my father in, it would have been probably around 1943 or 44, my father worked very hard, and they split the fees from the patients. My father got 10%, and Dr. Tyndall got 90%. My father was grateful, as he should have been. But I remember as a young boy, 10, 12 years later, my parents fighting about this, because 10, 12 years later, my father was still working very, very hard, and he's still getting 10% of the fees. And my mother thought he should be getting more, which of course is true, and eventually that worked out fine. But it's interesting. Another aside, so my father changed his name from Hans to John, Jody, and I have 3 grandsons. Our youngest grandson's a year and a half, and his name is Hans. Hans Wasserman. You can see how, in a way, it's justice. When my father came in 1939, he couldn't keep his name. And now, in 2023, when Hans was born, our daughter gave him that name. And my wife and I are so grateful to her and to her husband, Ben, for doing that. The stories you think of all the musicians, who were the great conductors of the 20th century? Bruno Walter, couldn't know that name. His name is Bruno Schlesinger, who changed his name to Walter. Eric Leinsdorf, the great Austrian conductor. His name was Eric Landauer. I'm not sure Leinsdorf is so less Jewish than Landauer, but that's what he did. And that was not atypical. My mother, who was a psychiatrist, would never talk about what happened to her parents. We only found out after she died. Just the way the professor didn't want to admit his Jewishness or talk about it. I'll never forget when I was about 12 or 13, I just had my bar mitzvah, and I was thinking about being a rabbi, and until there was too many conflicts with my Little League games, because they rose on Saturday mornings. I was so proud of being Jewish, and my mother said to me, "You should wish you were Protestant." So on the one hand, you want to wear your yarmulke. On the other hand, you want to hide your heritage because of hatred and anti-Semitism, which we now see is much more prevalent than we had ever imagined. Maybe it's not as more prevalent in certain countries than we would have imagined, but in our own country, it is shocking to all of us. And there are friends of ours who say the anti-Semitism that is existing now is more than anywhere in history since the end of the Second World War. Who's to judge? But certainly, it's true that people who support terrorism, support the murder of Jews, cannot be considered to be anti-Israel. They have to be considered to be anti-Semitic. And that is just the reality. If you don't agree with him, I'm terribly sorry. But history is very clear about what has happened and what is happening and why it is happening. And does it repeat itself? It does. And shockingly, thank goodness, here at the University of Miami and in general in Florida, it is not nearly as bad as it is in, of all places, New York, where more Jews, I think, live in New York than anywhere aside from Israel. It's easy to hate, and it's like saying, well, we're only frugal people. How many are we? 3-4% of the less of the population. Get rid of us first. That's easy, but you're next, and that's the reality. And it happened then, and it's happening to a certain extent now too.
I think you're absolutely right. The professor said it's 1986. Who cares? If you fill in the blanks, that can easily be 2024. And it's the apathy and the silence where things get dangerous. To close the loop on your parents, before your father passed away, he said something that I really love to show that your heritage and your family prevailed. And I'd love for you to share that story.
Well, I have to tell you a side before that. The Dichterliebe, right, is this great work of Schumann that we were loving, I hope, throughout this whole remarkable play. A couple Thanksgivings ago, my nephew, his name is Julius, he was Junior Schwartz, he was named obviously after my paternal grandfather, gave us an assignment. We were going to Thanksgiving at his house. Now, in our family, we have basically two musicians, well, I'm not considering Jody's side of the family, so it's not the Greitzer side, it's the Schwartz side. But Jody's a Schwartz now, so Jody is a musician, I'm a musician, and our son Julian is one great cellist. But Julius, who was a lawyer, gave us the assignment that we each had to sing a movement of Dichterliebe after Thanksgiving, when we had a few glasses of wine. We did. The whole family, everyone sang or played something of Robert Schumann. Can you imagine? It's like certain traditions continue. My father's, I mentioned Thanksgiving because that had always been my favorite holiday, because the two great holidays that we do at home are Passover and Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is a family holiday. You don't go to church, you don't go to synagogue. In Passover, obviously, you celebrate in the home. And we lived in this house in Weehawken, New Jersey, in the basement. It was a very wonderful basement. It had this huge long table, probably from there to the piano. And it started out with my parents, 2 people. I have 2 older sisters. And every year, there were more. And there were more. And the table got full. And my father and mother had 11 grandchildren. And then the grandchildren started having children. And my father died at the age of 94. And the last time we were all together with him, all we must have been 20 of us there, 20, maybe more than 20. And my father suffered from Parkinson's, and we had difficulty speaking. And I was sitting with him, and I said, "So Dad, look around the room. What do you think? What do you say?" And he said, with great difficulty, "I've not done too badly." And then this Thanksgiving, my side of the family, again, the Schwartz side, had all of us together again. All the kids, all the grandkids, all the cousins, all the nieces and nephews, 50 of us now. So my parents came in 1939, there were 2 of them, and now we're 50. I mean, and I must say, all type A's, if you know what I mean. Many doctors, lawyers, and we have a couple of other, little on the edge people, but basically it's a great group, and they all love each other and care about it, even if we disagree about things.
So, moving to your childhood, it can be argued that you were a child prodigy with the trumpet. And when you told your father that you wanted to go into music, he made sure that you had the best training possible. In the play, we saw a lot about the teacher-student relationship. You were lucky enough to be trained by folks like Bernstein, who the professor gave the affirmation is amazing. What were those experiences like from the student perspective?
You talk about Bernstein. I'm going to do a little tangent before I get there. Yes, I was lucky enough to know him quite well, and I played in the New York Philharmonic when he was conductor laureate. And Jody's family knew him much better than I, because my father-in-law was first viola in the New York Philharmonic, and my mother-in-law was a great pianist, and my father-in-law, Saul Gleitzer, would on occasion play a concerto, and my mother-in-law Shirley would go over to Lenny's house and they'd play the concerto for him on the piano. It was a family affair. I joined that family, which I'm very thrilled to be a part of. But the reason I want to tell the story is because this play was so extraordinary for me, because it was about a musician without a soul, right? It was about a musician who was a technician, a musician who played very well, but didn't have feeling. And then he had a professor who challenged him to do better, to feel in every way in life. And not long ago, Jody and I went to a concert, great orchestra, and it was a performance that I hated. I hated it because it was perfect and missing all of the soul that I was looking for. And I couldn't sleep that night. I was so upset that all of us were exposed to this great work of art, and in my opinion, it held up as a great work. It's like Beethoven Fifth. You play the Beethoven Fifth, I don't care who plays it. I remember in high school, I went to performing arts, and they contacted, there was the Mandolin Orchestra of New York, and they were doing a concert at Town Hall, but then they could play the violin parts, viola, cello, bass, and all mandolins, but they couldn't play the wind parts, so they hired a bunch of us from high school to go to Town Hall and play the Beethoven Fifth with them. So they're playing, on a mandolin. It was terrific. The Beethoven Fifth survived, if you know what I mean. So great music survives. But then today, tomorrow, I start rehearsing the Mahler Fifth Symphony with the Frost Symphony Orchestra. Schumann, of course, is one of our heroes, my hero, and that tradition from, so Schumann was born, I think it was 1810. Beethoven died in 1827. Now, why did I mention that? Well, that means while Schumann was alive, Beethoven was a figure. So Schumann was 17 when he died. I mean, you can be sure that Beethoven was a big deal for Schumann. And so the trajectory continues, and Schumann, I can tell many extraordinary stories about this great composer, but one of his closest friends became Brahms, and the young Brahms, and he loved Brahms, and he helped Brahms. And then the young Brahms got older, and then he helped Anthony Dvorak. So Dvorak was living in New York in the late 1895, 6, and maybe a little later. And he wrote the New World Symphony. And who edited the New World Symphony for publication? Brahms. Now what comes next? So now we move into the 1900s. So who's next? Mahler. So Mahler he was conductor at the Metropolitan Opera at the time. Then he became music director of the New York Philharmonic. And then he died in 1910. So in 1960 he was born in 1860, died in 1911, excuse me. So in 1960, 100 years, now Carlos Mosley, the manager of the New York Philharmonic, goes to Bernstein and says, Lenny, in 1960, 100th anniversary of Mahler's birth, and Mahler was a music director here. Wouldn't it be great to do all of his symphonies? And Bernstein thought that was a splendid idea. Now, why did I tell that story? Mahler now is an important figure in the world of orchestral music. Everybody knows Mahler. If you go to the movie The Maestro, Bradley Cooper conducts the end of the Mahler Second Symphony, which was quite remarkable and looked just like Bernstein, I must say. And so Mahler, because of this whole long line from Schumann to Brahms to Dvorak to Mahler to Bernstein, and so now tomorrow we start rehearsing the Mahler Fifth Symphony. So the concert's 2 weeks from now. It's a monumental piece. It's referred to a lot. If you saw the movie, what was the movie called? Jody, the other one.
Maestro?
No, the other one. Yes, about the woman conductor.
Oh,
Yeah. And what does she talk about all the time? The fifth, the Mahler Fifth. It was all about the Mahler Fifth. And so we start tomorrow. So what did I do this morning? I decided I still was upset about hearing something I wasn't happy with. So I have a recording of when I was in the orchestra in 1974, playing the Mahler Fifth Symphony with Bernstein on tour in Sydney, Australia. And I remember listening to it a while ago, 10 years ago. And I was very happy with the way I sounded since I don't play anymore. I'm dead now as a player, but boy, I sure could play. I listened to it all. Wow, I was very happy. I never listened to it again. Because it was a mess. It was a little schwartzy, a little dirty. It wasn't clean. It wasn't. And so this morning, I listened to it. Oh. It was like the play today. A few days ago, I heard a performance that just upset me terribly. That's the way the kid is at the beginning. And then I listened to Bernstein in 1974 doing this symphony. It was so passionate, so powerful, so musical. It wasn't quite perfect, Too bad, but who cares? And I used to care more. But this play is so, this is what I said to myself, this is my life. This play's my life. This is what I do every day. I listen to the piano. How should that note be played? How should that word be sung? What does it mean? And anyone that doesn't care deeply about it the way one should as an artist shouldn't be up there doing it. That's what this play was about. It was about anti-Semitism. It was about what was going on at the end of 1986. It was about Kurt Waldheim. We can say all those things. But for me as a musician, it was about the essence of art. Oh, how extraordinary is that, and how lucky are all of us to have witnessed this play, to hear it, and to hear the great music of Schumann. I figured that was Fischer Dieskau singing, but I don't know if it was over the speaker. When you heard the live, it sounded like Fischer Dieskau. It's just, I didn't answer your question. Almost. Getting there.
So on the inverse, now with the student-teacher relationship.
Hold on. Yeah. I apologize. So my father, when he discovered that I was serious about being a musician, he would do what every I was going to say Jewish parent would do. I think Christian parents would do the same thing. Must say, if you're going to be a musician, you better be a well-educated one. I'm not going to allow you to be a dumb trumpet player. You're going to be a well-educated musician. He sent me to the best teachers. He sent me to, I was composing at the time, he sent me to a teacher named Paul Creston, who you probably don't know of, but Paul was, in the 1950s and early 60s, one of the most important American composers. That doesn't mean he's not one of the most important American composers now. It just means that people aren't playing music anymore, because people don't play music like that anymore. You had a few allusions to that talking about modern music. There's nothing wrong with modern music, of course. I love that. I mean, I've premiered over 300 pieces. But there are good pieces and lousy pieces. They're not all created equal. And then, of course, the first question you should come to mind is, who's to decide whether it's good or bad? Well, I decide, or someone else who spent their whole life from the time they were 12 years old studying, thinking, and reading, and listening. So he may not always agree with me, but I haven't come to it without a huge amount of knowledge. And so my father, who was the greatest trumpet teacher? Well, that was William Vacchiano, who was the first trumpeter in the New York Philharmonic, whose place I took when he retired. So and then where should I go to school? I went to Performing Arts, one of the great public schools, music and art and performing arts in New York, with two of the great high school music schools. So he made sure that whatever happened, that I would have an education. So as a trumpet player in the New York Philharmonic, how did I become a conductor? Well, I had the background, I had the knowledge, I had very good piano training, I had very good training in theory, ear training. I had all these skills when I was still in high school. And so it was all because my parents, my father in this case, insisted that I be well educated. And I think that was a hallmark for our family. I told Matt the story that in our family, there was my mother, who was also a doctor, but she didn't go back to practicing medicine until I was 8. So, but until then, my sisters, who were 10 and 11, my mother would always say, you have to get perfect scores in school because you're the children of the doctor. I mean, that's absurd, right? Ridiculous. Children of the doctor, therefore you have to get straight A's. But we believed it. Why shouldn't we? She told it to us every day. You must get straight A's. You must ask questions at school. You must get perfect score. And that's what, if that's what's expected, if you can, you do it. No, it wasn't always. I mean, I didn't always, but most of the time, it worked. And it's that fundamental belief and care about education that I know everyone in this room has. You wouldn't be here, right? I mean, you go home now watching football, but instead you're hearing me talk, whether it's of any value or not, who knows, but you're hearing my story now. Any one of you could be up here, I'd love to hear your story too. But that's what we care about. We care about developing and furthering and being more knowledgeable. When I write a recommendation for a student, sometimes I'll say, shows tremendous promise and is growing wonderfully, right? So that means, he's not so good, huh? Then the next sentence says, just the way we all are trying to. So that the person reading the recommendation, even though I'm not saying the person's a finished product, I'm saying they're learning, but also like we all are, like we all care to. Every day, we all learn something every day, at least one day, not more. So I finally answered the question, I'm sorry.
So your wisdom and experience has allowed you to put American symphonic music on the world's radar, but you've also had the opportunity to do something that's really special and put Jewish symphonic music on the world's radar to put together the Millikan Archive. Can you talk about that experience?
That's a great question, thank you. So the Milken Archive, so there were two Milken brothers, Lowell and Michael, thank you. Michael was the one that Giuliani put in jail, and Lowell was the younger brother. And Lowell has a very strong Jewish identity. I think more so than Michael does. I'm not sure that's true, but that's what I feel. And Lowell decided that he wanted to document the history of classical music in the United States that had a Jewish influence of some kind. For example, it could be a text. It could be, Dave Brubeck wrote some kind of oratorio. Dave Brubeck was not Jewish. He wrote an oratorio based on a biblical text, let's say. I don't remember which the text was now, but it was from the Old Testament. It was about Moses or Abraham or something, and boom, that's part of the Milken Archive because it was a Jewish text of some kind. So this idea of Lowell's went to a man named Neil Levin, who was one of the foremost experts on anything to do with music and Judaism, which means he knows every cantor that ever lived for the last 150 years. I mean, his knowledge is extraordinary. And he got me involved. And now when I got involved, this was probably 20 years ago, 25 years ago. What did I know? Nothing. Now everybody knows the Brook Converge, right? Brook wasn't Jewish. Why did Brook write Converge? Well, he wrote oratorio. He wrote an oratorio called Moses. And why? Because all the Christian topics have been used by, Bach and by Mendelssohn and by Beethoven. But he was advised, look, use subjects from the Old Testament, because not many people had. Yes, the Judas Maccabeus by Handel and Israel and Egypt, but not much else. But Bruch was not Jewish, but he used this Jewish theme. So I knew that piece. Then Mendelssohn. Was Mendelssohn Jewish? Well, Mendelssohn's grandfather, Moses Mendelssohn, was a very famous rabbi, very famous, quoted to this day. But his parents converted, and of course he wasn't Jewish, he converted. In fact, his name in Germany in those days was Bartholdy. Mendelssohn Bartholdy had two names because Mendelssohn was too Jewish, and so he had a new name added to it. But we would say he's Jewish, which he wasn't. And I mean, there weren't, of course you had Leonard Bernstein. Now everybody knew he was Jewish, so you could always do something of his. He wrote 3 symphonies. He wrote some other pieces on Jewish themes, Jewish songs, based on songs from, anyway. But it wasn't a lot. So all of a sudden, the Milken Archive starts, and they get Neil Levin, and there are so many pieces, so many remarkable composers that I never even knew existed. There was one fellow named Herman Berlinski. I doubt that anybody's ever heard of Herman Berlinski. Herman Berlinski was German, born, came to the United States, obviously, during the Second World War, was an organist, became the organist at Temple Emmanuel in New York, and then at the biggest temple in Washington, D.C. He was also a composer. How would I even know, right? I mean, there's a connection there, because when we were living in Seattle for many years, we belonged to the Temple of Sinai, and when the new temple was dedicated, they hired Berlinski to write a piece for organ and 2 trumpets and some other things for the dedication of that. And I didn't know that was there. Turns out that Berlinski's daughter-in-law was our son's cello teacher. I didn't know that either. I didn't know anything about him until one day Neil came to me and said, we have this Friday night service by Berlinski. I want you to record it in Germany. And so he gives me the score. Wow, it was fantastic. Great music. If you're interested, you could all do Spotify, YouTube. Herman Berlinski, Friday night, so you can listen to it. It's really fantastic. And he came with us when we recorded. He's no longer alive now, but he came when we recorded. I'll never forget, because it's in English and Hebrew. And I would say mostly English. And we recorded it with the Ernst Choir, which was a very famous Berlin-based choir.
We did it in Berlin, the Berlin Radio Orchestra, and there were a young choir, I would say, average age 30, 35. And there was Berlinski, he's probably 90, going through the text with these kids and explaining what every word meant. Of course, he spoke them in German because that's his native tongue. And he translated the Hebrew, and he translated the English. And to see these kids just loving every second of hearing from Hermann Berlinski, that's what the Milken Archive did. And they did it for lots of composers. And I think we made something like, I'm not sure, 100 CDs of music. If you're interested in learning about Jewish influenced music, the Milken MILKN Archive for Jewish music, everything's online. Every piece, every essay, and it's, there are so many stories. I'll tell one more, just a brief one. We all know the name Kurt Weill, right? The Three Penny Opera and Mahagoni, and he wrote Broadway shows. Well, Kurt Weill obviously was Jewish, and he came to the United States, I think the year was 1934, because he was commissioned to write a piece about what's going on in anti-Semitism in Europe. All the pogroms, all the horrors that were happening in Eastern Europe, and about Poland, but it wasn't specific about a specific country. And it was, I'm trying to remember the name of the man who commissioned it from Chicago. It may have been Schwartz, but I'm not positive. And so he commissioned Kurt Weill to do the music. Franz Werfel, who I mentioned, was married to Alma Mahler to do the text, and Max Reinhardt to direct it. Max Reinhardt was arguably the most famous director in all of Europe. He was one of the founders of the Salzburg Festival. But all three of these men were Jewish, so they had to get out. They knew they had to get out, and this was their way out. And they came to New York and wrote a piece called The Eternal Road. It's an incredible piece. It's about, there were 5 stages, and on each stage, there's so now, in this ghetto in whatever country it is, they're told that if they don't leave by tomorrow, they're all going to be killed. It's like pack your bag, get out of town, or you're dead. And we hear about these stories even to this day about what goes on in countries like Venezuela. And so that you have a whole array of Jews. You have a religious Jew. Why me? I'm pious, I'm religious, I pray. Then you have the atheist. Why me? I don't even feel Jewish. I don't care about this. So you have these 5 different ideas of why me, and then the rabbi has to explain to each of them why they are being chosen or not chosen. It's a phenomenal piece, and I remember it's a great piece. You can listen to it too. It's available. A recording I did in Berlin, and I did a performance in Berlin. And so typical so Kurt Weill, he's Jewish. He wrote some wonderful music. The Mahagoni and the Three Penny Opera were German, when he was living in Germany. So now this piece he wrote mostly when he was living in Paris before he came to the United States. And of course the German critics said what a terrible piece it is because you can hear the horrible influence of America and American music on him. But of course he didn't even write it here. Then they went through this whole routine where it had to be sung in German because it's the original language, which of course is wrong. It was written in German, they also wrote in German, but it was translated into English, and it was done in English. It was never done in German. It's just crazy what happens. And the Milken Archive really is a treasure trove of brilliant essays and performances of music that most of the pieces I never even knew. It was a great education for me, and I'm so grateful to Walt for investing a huge amount of money in making this happen.
Another example of a great execution for you is how you made possible learning for your students. During the play, we heard the professor say, from now on, when I have American students, I'm going to have them sing in English. Have you had any aha moments from your students?
The great thing about teaching here, as you all know, if I had an aha moment, it would be, I wish I could do my class in Spanish. As you probably know, 60% of the students at the University of Miami are Hispanic or Latino. So, when people talk about diversity on the college campuses, you don't have to talk about diversity here. It's really quite extraordinary. The only aha moments I ever get is because I'm used to using a little Yiddish once in a while. I can't do that here, because no one gets it. If you can say, "He's sugar," so those are the only aha moments I get at that time.
I have one final question before we open it up for Q&A. So Schumann's song cycle, which we all listen to, was part of Heinrich Heine's poem of going through a peak of falling in love and then going through the plateau of being dumb. So that's where we experience love and joy in this play. Has there been an analogy of love and joy for you, love and sadness for you in the music experiencing it?
Well, the play is also, that poem is also about forgiveness, right? Forgetting the loved one for the loss of that love. And that whole idea of forgiveness is one that I think is crucial to all of us. On the one hand, you can be angry about what happened in the 1930s with Hitler, but on the other hand, you have to, if you can, get beyond it. And I mean, when I was growing up, my father would never buy anything that wasn't made in America. And you can imagine why. He changed. When Mercedes-Benz gave up a huge amount of money to the state of Israel in stock, he said, okay, now you can buy a Mercedes. I mean, that was a way of that. And the idea of everyone has had issues in their lives where you've had difficulty. There's not one person that I know that hasn't had some kind of difficulty. And there's no one I know that hasn't experienced some kind of wonderful love also. And so the idea of sadness and love, of course, it's everywhere in music, but it's everywhere in all of our lives. We all, hopefully don't have too much sadness, and hopefully have a lot of love, but both of those things always exist and always will. And when I do a piece like the Mahler Fifth Symphony, the slow movement is called the Adagietto, which is just for harp and strings. That's supposed to be his love song for his wife Alma. There's a lot of sadness in that movement as well. And it's interesting how one can we use adjectives in describing music, and sometimes the adjectives are very useful. Oh, that's very melancholy. That's very sorrowful. And other times, if you say that to an orchestra, they'll say, louder, softer, faster, slower. I mean, don't tell us about sadness. So, but it is very much a part of all of our lives.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'd like to open up for Q&A.
When and where will you be performing Mahler's Fifth?
At the Frost.
We're doing Frost, the concert action. I'm not going to advertise it, but it's a week from Saturday.
On Saturday.
The week, not the Saturday after, at Guston.
Second thing, there was a phrase in the play where they kept saying silence, silence. And I think one of the things that has upset me so much with all that's happening with the world of anti-Semitism, the silence of non-Jews, where the Jewish people have always been the ones against any of these things with the marching and with the money and whatever it was. But when you look at the response from so many people in America, it's pretty disappointing.
Of course it is. I agree with you 100%. There's a lot to be said when you're silent, and it's not a very positive thing. And when we think of all the groups that should be outraged and are silent, it's shocking. Now, in music, silence is a whole different thing. Silence is the most difficult thing to interpret. Silence is crucially important, but it has to feel like
it's there for a musical reason. So it has to feel like what's coming next is a reaction to that silence, the way it was in that song. So you hear the a cappella, this voice by itself, and then you hear these few little punchy chords. I mean, Schumann did it better than anyone, but the idea of silence is one that's crucial and very difficult to pull off. In modern society now, people want to be careful and they don't want to be political, but I don't consider terrorism and murder to be political at all.
So music, in many respects, is absolutely a universal language for all of humanity. In studies, every human being everywhere responds very similarly. And here in the play, as we all know, Germany and Austria were the source of some of the greatest spectacular music that impacts anybody listening to it anywhere in the world, just moved. And yet you have Nazis who love that music, who are still capable of these horrific acts of inhumanity. So something's still missing. I'd love to be able to say that music is the great unifier, but World War II is an illustration.
It's something that we often think about, because the greatest anti-Semite of all composers was Wagner, obviously. He was so unhappy with his first book of anti-Semitism that he rewrote it to make it worse. It's shocking when we see Hitler loving Beethoven. How dare he love Beethoven? But it's that old adage that if I could write about music, I wouldn't have to write music. And so music is something that goes beyond words. It really goes to emotional feelings. And how much did Wagner? A guy named Levy, Jewish, premiered his Parsifal in Bayreuth. Well, his wife was writing horrible things about him because he was Jewish. Wagner, on the other hand, asked him to premiere his opera. So, of course he was horrible, and of course it's a horrible, but for some reason, for him, the music transcended the hatred of us. And so I don't know the answer, none of us really do. On the other hand, in the sense that it's a universal language, it is a language where it goes beyond words, and no matter what you think politically, or what horrible prejudice you may have. They were talking about the typical Viennese style. How did they vote? Oh, did the fat one vote for Waldheim? That is such a prejudicial thing to say. And things we don't say that much anymore. Because that's prejudice, is saying, I'm identifying that person as a fat person, so therefore they are something. You know what I mean? But on the other hand, I think that the reason why we call it a universal language is it goes beyond all of the hatreds and prejudices we all have, or hopefully don't have. I'm with you. Not knowing. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all. Thank you for coming.